In this Blender video, I'll be demonstrating how to make this image of a silver and turquoise ring. I'll be using Blender version 2.76b. Let's start by creating a new project. So from the File menu, select New, and then click on Reload Startup File. To make it easier to see the scale and location of the objects that we'll be adding, switch from Perspective to Orthographic View by pressing 5 on the number pad. Now delete the cube by right-clicking on it to make sure that it's selected, and then press X. Now let's make the ring band. So add a circle by pressing Shift-A, and then select Mesh, and then Circle. Then enter Edit Mode by pressing Tab. Make sure that the Vertex button is selected, and then press A once or twice until everything is selected. Next, press E to extrude. We're going to extrude to the same location as the original vertices, so just right-click. Now scale it down in size by pressing S, then 0.95, then Enter. Next, we're going to extrude all of the vertices, so press A twice to select everything. Then press E, then 0.24, then Enter. Later we're going to be adding a subdivision surface modifier. So to keep the inside of the ring flat, we're going to add a little more geometry. So press Ctrl R to make a loop cut. Then hover the mouse over the inside of the ring until you see a line that runs around the inside. Then click the left mouse button, drag the line up until it's near the top, and click the left mouse button again when it's in place. Then repeat this for the bottom edge. So press Ctrl R, then left click, drag it near the bottom, and left click again. The outside of the ring is going to be curved, so let's add another loop cut. So press Ctrl R, then left click on the outside of the ring. This time, instead of dragging the line, just right click and the loop cut will be placed in the center. Now scale it up in size by pressing S, then 1.05, then Enter. Next, let's add a subdivision surface modifier and smooth it out. So press Tab to return to Object Mode. Then click the Object Modifiers button, and then the Add Modifier button, and then select Subdivision Surface. Set the View and Render values to 3, and then click the Smooth button. Now let's make the front face of the ring. So I'll move this ring band out of the way. Now add a circle by pressing Shift-A, and then select Mesh, and then Circle. Then rotate it on the X-axis by pressing R, then X, then 90, then Enter. Now scale it down in size by pressing S, then 0.5, then Enter. Now press Tab to enter Edit Mode. Let's start by making the front lip that fits around the edge of the stone. So press A once or twice until everything is selected. Then extrude along the Y-axis by pressing E, then Y, then 0.05, then Enter. Then scale it up in size by pressing S, then 1.1, then Enter. Next we're going to select these inside edges and add a thickness to them. So to select the edges, hold down the Alt key and then right-click on one of the edges. Then extrude on the Y-axis by pressing E, then Y, then 0.01, then Enter. Then scale it down in size by pressing S, then 0.97, then Enter. Now let's make the decoration that will go around the outside of the stone. So select these outside edges by holding down the Alt key while right-clicking on one of the edges. Then press E to extrude. We're going to extrude to the same location as the original vertices, so just right-click. Now scale it up in size by pressing S, then 1.3, then Enter. Next we're going to rotate these vertices so that the decoration will look like it has a twist. So press R, then Y, then 10, then Enter. Now we'll add a thickness to this. So press E, then Y, then 0.1, then Enter. Then to add a face on the back side, press F. Now we need to select all of the front faces that are part of the decoration. So click the Face Select button so that we can select faces. Then hold down the Alt key and right-click on one of the faces. Next, we're going to extrude these faces, but we need to extrude them as individual faces. To do that, click the Extrude menu and select Individual Faces. Then type 0.08 and press Enter. Since we extruded these as individual faces, each of the faces will be rounded after we add a subdivision surface modifier. So let's do that now. So press Tab to return to object mode. Then click the Add Modifier button and select Subdivision Surface. Set the View and Render values to 3, and then click the Smooth button. Now we're going to scale it on the x-axis. So press S, then X, then 0.7, then Enter. This is a good time to save what I have so far. So from the File menu, I'll select Save As. I'm going to name it ring.blend. Now let's add the turquoise stone. So I'll move this out of the way. Now add a sphere by pressing Shift-A and then select Mesh and then UV Sphere. Then press Tab to enter edit mode. Now press A once or twice until everything is selected. Next, rotate it on the x-axis by pressing R, then X, then 90, then Enter. Then press 3 on the number pad to switch to right side view, and then press A so that nothing is selected. We're going to be deleting all of the vertices on the right. So click the Vertex Select button so that we can select vertices. Then switch to wireframe mode so that we can select the vertices on the backside. Now press B and drag the selection box over the vertices on the right. Don't include the vertices in the middle. Now press X to delete and select vertices. Now press Tab to return to object mode and then switch back to solid view. Next, we're going to flatten this out a little. So press S, then Y, then 0.5, then Enter. Now scale it down on the x-axis by pressing S, then X, then 0.7, then Enter. Now scale the whole thing down in size by pressing S, then 0.5, then Enter. Next, we'll add a subdivision surface modifier and smooth it out. So click the Add Modifier button and then select Subdivision Surface. Set the View and Render values to 3 and then click the Smooth button. Now let's position the 3 ring pieces together. So press N to open the Properties panel. Make sure that the location of the stone is at 0 for all 3 axes. Now right-click on the front face of the ring to select it. Then set all 3 location values to 0. Then right-click on the ring band to select it. Then set all 3 location values to 0. Now rotate the view so that you can see the backside. Then drag the band until it's just touching the backside of the other piece. The Y location value should be about 1.1. Now press 1 on the number pad to switch to front view. Then drag the band up until it's centered. Now right-click on the stone to select it. Then drag it back a little. The Y location value should be about 0.05. We don't need the Properties panel anymore, so press N to close it. We're going to be joining these 3 ring pieces together to make a single object, but we still want to be able to add separate materials to each piece. One way to do this is to add a material to each piece before joining them. So click the Material button, and then click the New button. Then come up here and change this from Blender Render to Cycles Render. Then click the Use Nodes button. Name this material Stone. We'll be making changes to this material later using the node editor. Now right-click on the front face piece to select it, and then press the New button. Set the surface type to Glossy. Then click here to set the color. Now click the hex button and set the color to C3, C3, D1. Then set the roughness value to 0.05. Name this material Front. Next, right-click the band to select it. Then click the small button on the left side of the New button and select Front. To keep the ring band material separate from the front face material, we need to make a copy. So press the plus button to copy the material and name it Band. Now let's join the pieces together. The band is currently selected, so hold down the Shift key and right-click on the front face and then the stone to add them to the selection. Then click the Join button. Now the ring is a single object and the three materials are listed here. A little later, we'll be making changes to these materials using the node editor. But before we do that, let's position the ring, add a surface for it to sit on, and set up the lighting in the camera. So let's rotate the ring a little along the y-axis. So press R, then Y, then -7, then Enter. Then press 3 on the number pad to switch to right side view. Then press R to rotate, and rotate the ring until the two bottom surfaces are even with each other. Next, let's add a surface for the ring to sit on. So press Shift A and select Mesh, and then Plane. Scale it up in size by pressing S, then 10, then Enter. Then drag it down until it's just below the bottom of the ring. Now let's set the material, so click the New button. We're going to keep the diffuse surface type and white color. Now let's set up the lighting. We're going to use two plane objects to light the scene. So press Shift A and select Mesh, and then Plane. Then press 3 on the number pad to switch to right side view. Then drag the plane up about 2 grid divisions, and then drag it to the left about 2 grid divisions. Now rotate it by pressing R and face it toward the ring. Next, press 1 on the number pad to switch to front view and drag the plane to the left by about 3 grid divisions. Now let's make the second light source. So press Shift D to duplicate and place it 5 grid divisions to the right. Now press 7 on the number pad to switch to top view. Then rotate the plane by pressing R and face it toward the ring. Then do the same for the other plane. So right-click to select it and R to rotate. This is what the scene should look like. Now let's add a material to the first plane. So click the New button and set the surface type to Emission. Then click the color and make it slightly yellow. Now set the strength to 20. Next, right-click on the second plane to select it. Then click the New button and set the surface type to Emission. Then click the color and make it slightly blue. Now set the strength to 15. This is a good time to save what I have so far. Next, let's set up the camera view, so press 0 on the number pad. This is the view looking through the camera. I'll zoom in a little. Now I'm going to lock the camera to the view. To do that, press N to open the Properties panel and put a check mark next to Lock Camera to View. Then press N again to close the Properties panel. Now I can zoom, pan, and rotate while looking through the camera. The default focal length setting that Blender uses is 35 mm. Since this is going to be a close-up image, let's change the focal length setting to 100 mm. To do that, find the camera in the outliner and select it. Then click the Object Data button if it's not already selected. This is where you can change the focal length. Set it to 100. Now I'll set up the view that I'd like to use. We're going to be using the pointiness attribute to make the lower portions of the metal look darker. But to get the expected results, we should make sure that the normals are facing the right direction. So right-click on the ring to select it. Then press Tab to enter edit mode. Now press A once or twice until everything is selected. Then select the Shading UVs tab and click the Recalculate Normals button. Now press Tab to return to object mode. Now let's use the node editor to finish setting up the materials for the ring. So from the screen layout menu, select Compositing. Then click the Shader Nodes button. Now click the Material button. You may need to resize this panel to bring the Material button into view. Here are the three materials for the ring. To get a preview of how this will render, click the Viewport Shading menu and select Rendered. We don't need to make any changes to the band material, so let's work on the front material. So click it to select it. To give myself more room to work, I'll close this property panel by pressing N. We're going to add some nodes to make the metal look darker in the low areas. So let's start by mixing in a dark material. So press Shift A and select Shader, and then Mix Shader. Drop it on the connection coming out of the glossy shader. Then move the connection to the bottom shader input. Now press Shift A and select Shader, and then Glossy. Connect it to the top shader input and set the color to black. We're going to control the factor input using a pointiness attribute and a couple of math nodes. So press Shift A and select Input, and then Geometry. Then press Shift A again and select Converter, and then Math. Set the math type to multiply. Then press Shift A and select Converter, and then Math. Set the math type to subtract. Now connect the pointiness output to one of the multiply inputs. Then connect the multiply output to the top subtract input. Then connect the subtract output to the factor input. These two math nodes will allow us to scale the pointiness output. As a starting point, set the multiply value to 50 and the subtract value to 25. Now you can see that the lower areas of the metal are darker. I'll zoom in so you can see this better. If you increase the multiply value, the dark areas will lighten up. I'm going to use a value of 50.6. Now let's work on the stone material, so click it to select it. We'll start by changing the diffuse color. So click the white color and set the hex value to 15BBE2. I'm going to make more room to work. Now let's mix in a glossy shader. So press Shift A and select Shader, and then Mix Shader. Drop it on the connection coming out of the diffuse shader. Then press Shift A again and select Shader, and then Glossy. Connect it to the bottom shader input. Keep the color set to white and change the roughness value to 0.02. Now press Shift A and select Input, and then Layer Weight. Connect the facing output to the factor input. This will control how the diffuse and glossy shaders are blended together. The surface areas that are angled away from the camera will use more of the glossy shader than the surface areas that are angled toward the camera. Now set the blend value to 0.15. Now let's mix in another color to make some dark veins in the stone. So press Shift A and select Shader, and then Mix Shader. Drop it on the connection coming out of the diffuse shader. Then move the diffuse shader to the bottom input. Next, press Shift A and select Shader, and then Diffuse. Connect it to the top shader input. Set the color to 213010. Now we're going to use a noise texture along with some math nodes to control the factor input. So press Shift-A and select Texture, and then Noise Texture. Then press Shift-A and select Converter, and then Math. Then duplicate the math node 2 times. So press Shift-D to duplicate. Then Shift-D again. Set the first math node to multiply. Set the other 2 math nodes to subtract. Now let's connect these nodes. So connect the noise texture's color output to one of the multiply inputs. We're using the multiplication node to scale the noise texture. Set the value to 5. Now connect the multiply output to the top input of this subtraction node. Also connect the multiply output to the bottom input of this subtraction node. The 2 subtraction values should be set to half of the multiply value, which in this case is 2.5. The top subtraction node is used to offset the noise texture so that it will be centered around 0. The bottom subtraction node inverts the noise texture and also centers it around 0. If you connect the bottom subtraction output to the factor input, you can see what the inverted texture looks like. If I connect the top subtraction output to the factor input, then the colors will be reversed. Now we're going to combine the 2 subtraction node outputs using another math node. So press Shift-A and select Converter, and then Math. Drop it on the connection coming out of the subtraction node. Then connect the bottom subtraction node to the other input and set the math type to maximum. The output of this node will be the greater of the 2 inputs, and it will look like dark veins running through the stone. To sharpen this effect, we'll add another math node. So press Shift-A and select Converter, and then Math. Drop it on the connection coming out of the maximum node. Set the math type to Power. Then set the bottom value to 0.3. Now we're going to adjust the pattern of the veins. This can be done by changing the noise texture scale and detail values. I'm going to set the scale value to 3.2 and the detail value to 16. If I zoom in, you can see that the veins are very thin. To make them a little thicker, increase the top subtraction value to 2.52. Now let's return to the default screen layout. Next, we're going to adjust the depth of field to make the back of the ring look a little bit out of focus. To do this, we'll start by defining a point in space where the scene will be in focus. We can use an empty object for this. So press Shift-A and select Empty, and then Plane Axes. This object doesn't have any geometry. It just represents a point in space. Now press 1 on the number pad to switch to front view. Now drag the empty up a little. Then press 3 on the number pad to switch to right side view and drag the empty to the side until it's aligned with the front surface of the ring. This will be the focus point. Now press 0 on the number pad to switch to camera view. Then to get a preview of how this will render, click the Viewport Shading menu and select Rendered. Next, find the camera in the outliner and select it. Then click the Object Data button if it's not already selected, and go down to the Depth of Field section. Now click in the Focus entry box and select the empty that we added. This will be the focus point. We're going to use an f-stop value of 1. So click the Aperture menu and select f-stop. Set the number value to 1. Now the front of the ring will be in focus and the back of the ring will be slightly out of focus. Everything looks good now, so we're ready to render the final image. So click the Render button. Then open the Sampling section. I'm going to set the number of render samples to 1000. The larger this value is, the better the final image will look, but the longer it will take to render. Now I'm going to save the project. It's a good idea to do this before rendering in case something goes wrong during the rendering process. Now I'll click the render button. If you want to stop the rendering process before it's done, you can press the escape key or you can click the X next to the render progress bar. This is going to take a few minutes to render, so I'll pause the video until it's done. Rendering is finished and this is the final image. To save the image, go to the Image menu and select Save as Image, or you can press F3. I'm going to name this image ring.png. If you want to return to the 3D view, then click this menu and select 3D View. To go back to the rendered image, click the menu and select UV Image Editor. Well, that concludes this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe and leave a comment.